If you're watching this video, chances are you have heard of Rive. Motion designers, web designers, game developers, everyone's jumping on the Rive train for good reason. It's easy to use, it's fun to work on things, and it's highly in demand. Companies like Duolingo, Shopify, Google, they're all picking up Rive now. And maybe you've thought to yourself, gosh, I should learn this, but where do I start? Well, have no fear, I'm here to help you. My name's Joey Judkins, I'm a Rive motion designer, and I'm gonna take you through your first 10 minutes in Rive. Rive is free to new users, so all you have to do is go to rive.app, go to get started, and then you'll be able to download the app for yourself, and then just open up the app. Welcome to Rive. If you've used Rive before, you'll see that there's these recent projects here, but then right here, for new users, this is the Learn Rive section where Rive has placed links to their amazing Rive 101 course. Today's just a really quick lesson in Rive just to get you going, but if you really want to do a full intro to Rive, I highly recommend starting with the Rive 101 on Rive's official YouTube channel. They take you through every element of the app and you'll absolutely know everything about Rive from start to finish. Each lesson is really short. It's kind of bite-sized lessons and they just do a really great job. It's really well put together. So definitely start here if you want to do a deeper dive into Rive. You can also find the links to this Rive 101 course in the description of this video, which is down below. And hey, while you're down there, why not like the video, subscribe to my channel. It helps me out a lot and it helps me know that I'm doing something that matters to people. And by the way, you matter to me. So let's keep going. All right, let's make something in Rive. Let's go up to New File, click the button. You'll get greeted with some options for creating an artboard. Its default is 500 by 500. This is fine, so we can just press Create Artboard now. So to move around this artboard space, all you have to do is press spacebar, kind of like if you're moving around on a canvas in Illustrator, but also you can hold your middle mouse button, you can hold your command button to zoom in and out with a scroll wheel. I think if you have a trackpad, you can do pinching and zooming. There's a lot of different ways you can do this, but it feels pretty intuitive after you've done it for like a minute. It's really similar to how Figma's canvas space works. So you can have an artboard, you can have multiple artboards. It's really fluid to sort of zoom in and out and move around. We're not going to do a full overview of everything on the interface. We're only going to talk about the things that we need to make something today. So right now, let's go up here to our shape tool creator and let's just make a shape. It doesn't matter what your shape is. So I'm just going to make a square. And over here, I can see I've got some options for creating color. I can add a stroke if I want, make that stroke bigger, change the color here from solid to like a linear gradient or a radial gradient. I think the linear gradient is fine. Just make a shape however you want it to be. I'm going to mess with the color here a little bit. And I'm going to make the corner radius something like this. Congrats, we made a shape in Rive. So this is our design mode, and this is where you want to make shapes. Anything that you're going to create that's going to be in your canvas, you want to do that in design mode. And then we can switch over to animate mode when we're ready to make it interactive or to make it move. So if you really just want to quickly switch between design and animate mode, I do this all the time, you can just press tab. So to create animation, we use keyframes, right? But just a quick overview, anything that we change on this shape while we're in a timeline will create a keyframe. You can actually see these little diamond buttons over here that will set keyframes if we click them. So if I press those two, it created a keyframe for the position X and Y. And then over here, I can move it down the timeline and sure enough, it will animate from whatever position I set at the beginning to the position I set at frame looks like 38. But another thing that's a little different about Rive is that timelines also store those keyframes as sort of information for interactivity. So anything that we decide we want to change when we have an interaction, so say we have a hover or we have a click or we have an event that happens, all of those things become pieces of information that Rive uses to create the animation during interactivity. So now that we know how animation works in Rive, and how Rive uses timeline keyframes to animate the properties of these shapes. So we can actually use these timelines to create states of our shape by storing a keyframe for whatever property we want to change. In this case, let's make two timelines. And I'm going to call this first timeline the initial. And then I'm going to call the second timeline hovering. Instead of animating a lot of stuff on a single timeline, which you can do in Rive, in our case, we're just going to create two different states of this object. I actually kind of like that this stroke is here on a hovering state. So what I'm going to do is set some keyframes for the stroke and the color of this shape so that on hover, it will look like this, but on initial, it will look a little different. So I'm going to create a keyframe here on this stroke width, which is this number here, and we'll set it to 13. And I'll also make a keyframe for the color of our gradient. You can see that I only have a single keyframe, and that's because, again, Rive is only using this timeline to store the information about those properties for this hovering state. So now we can hop over to our initial state, and I'm going to change this to 0 so that we don't have a stroke when it's not hovering. And then I'm going to change this color to something else. Let's see, maybe we can go a little darker and a little deeper here. So now we have an initial state and a hovering state. It's really important that between timelines, you carry over the same keyframes that you want to change. So you can see I have a stroke keyframe and a fill keyframe. If I go to hovering and pull this shape down, you'll see I have a stroke and a fill for this as well. So now let's talk about the real meat and potatoes of what makes Rive special and unique. It's called the state machine. The state machine is what allows us to create interactive motion graphics. So rather than just pressing play on a video and then watching it all the way to the end, we can create interaction between our animations using the state machine. So I'm not going to cover every aspect of the state machine, but just to get us started, just know that this little arrow here indicates that there's a transition between this node and this node. So entry just means right away, whenever your Rive animation starts, this will happen first. And because there are no conditions here, which we'll talk about here in a minute, it's like a go sign to the next state. So let's add our other state. This is called the hovering state, right? So we can add it wherever we want. I'm actually going to move this any and exit state out of the way because we're not going to really use those today. And then I'll move this hovering state over here to the right. So to connect these two timelines together, all we have to do is drag from one to the other. And we can even drag from the second one back to the first. So here we have an entry, an initial, and our hovering, and they're all connected in the state machine. So now that we know how to connect these timelines together, let's remove this transition so that we can see what happens when we press play and it goes from entry to initial to hovering. What's going to happen is it will skip immediately over initial and go straight to hovering because technically it did go through initial, but since processing this happens so fast, it happened in just an instant. So let's go ahead and add that arrow back to initial. And let's talk about how we're going to make this interactive. Now we're at the point in our Rive design where we get to decide what kind of interaction we want to have. Rive uses all kinds of methods for creating interaction. Sometimes we can use inputs. Think mouse interactions like hovering and clicking. There are time-based events and triggers that you can make. And there's even ways to control animation with data. Since you are the Rive designer, it's your job to decide how you want the interaction to work. There's no code here. It's just your creativity, your imagination, and your ability to problem solve using fun and creative solutions. So for today's example, I've already talked about it. We're going to make it a hover interaction. And in Rive, listeners are the way that we create interaction. So let's go over here to this listeners tab. We're going to create a listener. There's a couple things we need to tell Rive. First is the target. In our case, we want the target to actually be this rectangle because we need a hitbox for any kind of mouse interaction. This rectangle works just fine because it's already box shaped, so it can act like our hitbox. And we'll call this pointer enter. So we have our target, it's our rectangle. In fact, let's change the name. We'll call this the button. So our target is our button. Then we have to decide two more things. One is, what is the user action? So in our case, we want it to be pointer enter. And then we decide, what do we want Rive's action to be? So down here, we have our Rive actions. So before we talk about adding our input for whether it's hovering or not, let's create one more listener where we're going to duplicate this one, and we'll call it pointer exit. We'll keep the button as our target, and let's change pointer enter to pointer exit. So now we have two listeners. Now we can talk about inputs. When I started working in Rive, the only way to add any kind of data was through inputs. To have a scroll percentage from 0 to 100, you could use a number input to trigger those interactions. A Boolean is something like a true or false, so if hovering is true or if hovering is false. And then a trigger input is something like, if an event happens, then trigger this animation. But now we have something called data binding. Up here on this top left of the window, you can see hierarchy, then assets, and data. But before we do all that, on the left side, let's actually grab our artboard and make sure our artboard is selected, and we're going to go up here to data bind and press this plus button to create a view model. We've created what's called a view model, which is really just a box that's going to contain all of our data. for this artboard in Rive. For today, though, we just need to create a single input, and we can do that by clicking this little icon over here to the right of our view model. And you can see there's a lot of different types of data we can store now. So compared to this, where we really only had these 3 types of data, now with data binding, we have all these different types of data. Let's just create a Boolean. This is a true or false value. And so in our case, we know that hovering will either be true or false. So it's a perfect opportunity to create a Boolean. Over here on the right, we can decide whether we want it to be false or true by default. And I think in our case, we would like it to be false by default, because if it was true, then that would mean that the user is automatically hovering on it when they first open the Rive file, which we don't think is going to happen. So let's just make sure that the hovering value is set to false by default. So now we can go back to our state machine. So remember how we had no barriers here, and so it just kind of goes back and forth indefinitely? Well, now we can add that condition of whether it's hovering or not before it goes to this timeline. So we have to grab this transition, the one from initial to hovering, and we can press this plus button down here to create a condition. And if we tap this drop down, we'll actually see our input now. It's hovering right here in our view model 1. Go ahead and click that. So now we have it set to if hovering equals true, then it will transition to this timeline over here. And then let's grab this left one, press the plus button, set if hovering is false, and it will go back to the initial. We've set up our inputs so that our transitions will only happen when those inputs happen. But if we press play on the state machine and we try to hover over it now, nothing's happening. That's because Joey, your humble YouTube tutorial maker, forgot to actually set those values in the listeners themselves. So remember how we already set the user action. We didn't set the Rive action. This is a common mistake that happens, especially early on when you're using Rive for the first few times. In my case, it was forgetting to actually set those values for that hovering input with our listeners. So go back to our listeners panel, go to pointer enter, make sure that hovering will set the value to true. And then on exit, we will set hovering to false. So now if we press play on the state machine, it does work. Maybe you did something different with your timeline. You did something with scale. Maybe you did something with some position. So if we do hovering and initial and we just add some keyframes here, I can change the scale, I can change the position. So now with hover, it will move up and also get bigger. So that's pretty cool. We created a fun little quick interaction using a hover state, but let's actually add a little bit more spice to our transitions. We can grab either of these transitions or both, and I'm gonna change the duration of them to, I don't know, let's make it 350 milliseconds. We also have the option here to change the interpolation. On hover, let's give it a little bit of an elastic interpolation. We can even kind of like change the bounciness level. How long does it take? How bouncy is it? In fact, let's make it 500 milliseconds for that. And then on returning to initial, we can change it to, let's make it shorter. Let's make it 200 milliseconds. And we'll just have it ease back into it. Nice snappy ease. These are things you can just change in the transitions right here. If we press play, we can test it out. I mean, that's pretty cool. While the state machine's even playing, you can mess with these transitions. So you can see just how crazy you can get with something like a bounce transition there. See? Let's make it back to 1.4 with more bouncies in between. So you can do that while the state machine is playing even to see how it's affecting your animation. Congratulations, you've created your first interactive design in Rive, which makes you a Rive designer. I know it was a quick tutorial, but I hope this is enough to sort of get you excited about Rive and the possibilities of Rive, and then go and explore on your own. There's even some courses you can take for Rive right now. School of Motion has one. Jake Bartlett has a great intro to Rive course that I highly recommend as well, especially if you're coming from a motion design background. So go forth, have fun in Rive. I can't wait to see what you create, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.